Hey everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to another Design Cuts live session. This week we have with us the absolutely wonderful Tony from Green Room Media, who's going to be demoing his new amazing product, Ultimate Ink for Procreate. Super excited to see what you show us today. So what will you be showing us today, Tony?
So yeah, I'm going to try to go through everything. I'm going to go from inking, getting your flat colors in, getting your shading done, and try to make it look three-dimensional, have a bit of life, have a bit of texture and grit to it. So yeah, so it might be slightly ambitious to try and cover all of this. So as I said to you earlier, we're going to be speed talking, trying to show how to speed illustrate, but we'll try it and see if we get through it. And sure, look, if there's anything that I go over too quickly or anything, just if people want to just drop a comment in, and I'll find some way to come back and revisit it, and we can add in extra video content, or we'll figure out some way of getting it over.
Perfect.
But anyway, so right, we'll start off the sketch. Now, obviously, I'm going to go from the inking stage beyond that. But I mean, to be honest with you, the most important thing is to get your sketch right and as accurate as you possibly can before you even begin, because it'll just save you so much hassle in the long run. And if you're looking to go through stuff very quickly and kind of just almost switch off while you ink and shade, you don't want to be trying to figure out, oh, how does this line connect with this? So it's always good to do that. And the second thing that I always do, I try to figure out little things like, where's my light source going to come from? So for this little dude, I'm going to have the light coming from above and slightly behind them. So I even might sketch in an extra layer that shows the shadows that were, so I know where my lights, where my shadows are going to be. And then the final thing I do before I start is I will usually create a layer with a really high contrast color, something like a pink. I'll change the layer mode to screen, and that way I can see when I go to put my black inks on exactly what I've done, what I haven't done. Okay, so let's jump into the inking. I'm going to go into pick my favorite one, which is called the One. And I like to, just do a couple of lines, just make sure it's how I want it to be at the start. I try to, whatever my kind of neutral weight is, that's how I want it to appear. So that way, if I go a little bit lighter or if I go much heavier, I know it's going to work, and I don't have to keep going backwards and forwards. And I'll bear in mind as well where the light and the dark is going to be. So I tend to try to do slightly thinner lines towards the light and thicker ones on the back. So I'm going to do a couple of passes of ink, but anyway, I'll stop talking and I'll actually start to put some of this in. So normally I might take a little bit more time to do these, but you'll get the idea fairly quickly. So I will say as well that the undo tool is your friend. I mean, if you do a line that's not right, get rid of it, do it again. Don't be afraid to take multiple passes at things. So I think I actually have that a little bit too thick. But one of the little tricks that I like to use when I'm inking is I don't always use completely solid lines. So for example, on this ridge that's on the cylinder shape of the upper arm, I'll kind of do a little broken line. So that gives the impression that there is a meeting of two parts, but it actually is a little less subtle than a hard edge like you might find over here. So I think another kind of useful tip as well is to get your hand position right as well. Because I mean, for example, if you want to try to draw a curve on the head, which is one of the most important parts, to try to do the curve right, it's terrible. It's just not going to look right. Whereas if you try to be able to move from your wrist, it's a little bit more natural. Now, I suppose another thing to consider is whether to use the really cool shape snapping feature in Procreate as well, where you can draw, hold, and then it'll make you a nice perfect line. But I suppose that's down to your own style and your own taste and what way you'd like to like that to look yourself. So yeah, so I mean, I think the one thing you're going to find, whether it's with the inking or any of the shading, or as we build up the different layers of color and tone that goes into this, it's the same thing done over and over and over again. And if you open up, reality is it's the same things that are just done over and over again and repeated. So there's only a handful of things that you need to be able to master to be able to actually build it into much more interesting objects. So yeah, so I think what I might do is there's no point to me kind of inking every single part of this. So it's the same principle of just putting in the lines, you know, kind of using the broken lines for anywhere that's a little less of a hard corner of that. So I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to just turn on the main ink lines there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do what would be my second pass. So I mean, I think it's fair enough to say that, you know, everybody would kind of get the gist of the main line so far. Yeah.
Yeah, it's looking really great. Looking really great, Tony. And
so once I've done my main lines, I'll work in another layer. Now, I always work in loads of layers because it just gives a lot of flexibility to be able to come back, revisit things, try out new things.
Paul was also saying in questions, do you have any other good tips for line control?
Well, I think practice is definitely a good one. And I think, you know, doing it over and over and over again, and especially when it comes to hatching, you know, I think being able to get the control to kind of go from thicker to thin lines and kind of get that smooth and just be able to make the pen do exactly what you want it to do. I think that will just start to give a bit of confidence
Sure.
in being able to control the lines. And I think learning to get you to figure out what way your hand works best. You know, sometimes it's better to draw from the wrist. Sometimes for something you might want to move your entire arm over. That'll get something that's a bit more smoother. So I suppose it's figuring out what way that what feels natural for your hand movement. So I mean, I'm guilty of it myself, but I think it's worth, you know, doing some of the really, really basic stuff where you take a cylinder or a circle or a cube and just, you know, kind of try to get your parallel lines in to shade in different sides, and then kind of work on your cross hatches. Try to get everything like evenly spaced. So you're looking at the spaces in between the lines as much as the lines, and you know that's going to be massively useful anyway for any shading or hatching that you're going to be doing. So if you can do those hatches, you can do any lines that you want. So yeah, so when I've got the main lines done, I'll start to put in my super hard shadows, and usually that'll involve thickening up lines where the light is not getting to. Now the coloring and the shading is going to help with this as well, but I think sometimes it's just best to get that really high contrast in for certain parts, just to make it look more three-dimensional. So, I mean, yeah, the same principle applies, just taking up the lines that are furthest away from the light. And then another step that you can do to try and make it look even more 3D is you can start to go from the dark to the light and find some ways of breaking that up. So, for example, I can kind of add a couple of lines in here, start to break them up. And when you zoom out, you can see that kind of creates a gradient, even though it's a full solid black. So, you know, it's kind of an optional thing, but for some illustrations, it's nice. You can achieve the same thing using the colors and blend them between the two, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes. But that's one way of doing it. Another is the hatching that we mentioned before, which is where you're kind of going to do lines that will go from the dark to light, and you want that to kind of follow the shape that it's going around, like it's wrapping around it or drawn on it. So that'll help show that, okay, that's a curved surface. Same again, add in some going the other way. I'm just going to start to use some of the pattern brushes. Like the patterns are super cool because you can change the size of your brush and it doesn't affect the size of the pattern. So it lets you get in and do kind of nitty gritty stuff, but you can also cover huge areas at the same time. And because it's pattern based, it'll always match up whenever you go back to it.
I love these. Really love them.
So if we take our stipple brush, let's just start to very quickly plonk in some of these patterns. Nothing particularly neat about it, but use that on the surfaces.
I love, I think in one of your videos that you did for the pack, you did some trainers with like some cross hatching, and it just instantly really brought them to life. It was really cool.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, like the likes of that, I don't like the halftone on that. Actually, I'm going to turn off my shadow sketch there, but you can see how it turns it from being very flat to, you know, 3-dimensional very quickly. But, you know, I don't like that on that, so I can try something else. If I want something darker, maybe that's like a hatch. So again, I'm just kind of putting this in where compass spot's going to be in the shade.
It really gives that instant grunge, if you know what I mean. And like, so yeah, it's really nice.
So yeah, so it only takes a couple of seconds to add it in. So it's very quick to trial and error stuff. Even if you have a good idea of exactly what you want to do, you can kind of, you know, stop and give something else a whirl if you like. Again, I don't particularly want to use that one. I'll go with the one that I've prepared there, which is just a lino hatch one. And one other little trick that I'll show you with these is just on the side with the lino hatch. I mentioned that the patterns will always nicely, perfectly meet up, but if you actually rotate the canvas, you're able to layer the different patterns on top of each other. So whichever way you draw it, again, that could be another way of building up texture and pattern.
Well, I was going to say, Paul asked if the halftone dots could be adjusted, but I guess you could get different effects on those dots doing exactly that.
Yeah, well, the halftone dots absolutely can be adjusted. Yeah, there's actually a stroke version of it as well. That goes from kind of lighter dots to heavier dots, but this one does work with the size does change depending on how big you set your brush, but you can go in and change your settings. But this is one of the really common things that I love working with halftone. So I've actually put together, let me see, you can see that there's all of these different halftones. So there's like a light, irregular, and a bold version, and a heavy, but they're also done in different sizes. So if you're working at a lower resolution, they're already set up to be smaller dots. If you're working on a much higher resolution, then there's larger dots already there. So it's just something just to save you a couple of minutes, because I just found that I was constantly changing them. And if you're working with something that has light dots, and I'll put in a heavy on top of that.
I do have a theory that you just basically didn't sleep for the amount of time it took, because the level of detail you've got in this product is so crazy.
Well, it's just to be, you know, it's just to be practical, because I mean, I want to use these myself, and you know, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to learn how to draw, how to shade, how to ink, and you know, I'm nowhere near the end of my journey on that. So I just wanted to be able to have as many tools available to me that weren't just, you know, pack fillers. So yeah, so I think that's there. And I mean, we'll add more stuff in if, you know, if we find that a bunch of people are missing out on something, then absolutely we're going to pop those brushes in as well. So yeah, so I'm planning on using this pack for a very long time until I get absolutely sick of it, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
So, I mean, do engage with Tony on social, because obviously he totally wants to engage with this product. He wants to see the work you're putting together, improve the product, add to it, use it for your illustration, have a go at Inktober this year. Don't feel pressured to do it absolutely every single day, because I know that can be a lot of pressure. We'll do it with friends and take it in turns, or, you know, mix it up a bit.
Yeah, but that's it. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, if it turns into a chore, then like, what's the point? And yeah. I think when you start the force work, it can you know, it comes across in what you're doing as well. Yeah. So I mean, so there's some very, you know, that's kind of the inking side and the pattern side, where you can just get a bit of shape and form so that it goes from looking very flat and two-dimensional to something that has a bit of depth to it. So the step I normally go on next is I get my flat colors in, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. Again, I'm going to always be working in layers, and that'll become very apparent as to why I do that. So, you can do it manually. I'm going to switch to a shader brush. I use something like a cell color, which is a super, super basic brush. I'll try not to spill ink all over the page. So all I want to do is I don't really care about the color either at this point. I just want to get my flat colors in. I've always been the messy child that couldn't color inside the lines, which is why I work with digital and been able to erase. So, you can do it manually like that, and it's worth always using, especially if you're going to use the dropper tool to fill in once you've got the edges done. Always use a really solid, fully opaque brush, and like the likes of the cell shaders. Otherwise, you get little kind of dots inside that doesn't look very nice. So that's the manual way, and depending on your style, you might need to do it like that if you've got a lot of broken lines. But I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of the really cool reference layer feature. Have you ever used that, Matt?
No, I've not personally, no.
Okay, so the reference layer, I'm going to use the main ink lines as the reference layer. And what this will do is it allows me to work on a different layer, but it uses all the pixels that are colored in on this layer as the markers for where everything should go. So I'm going to click on the ink main layer. I'm going to turn it into a reference layer. Now I'm going to go back to the layer where I'm going to put my flat color on it. So now, hopefully, when I drag this color in, it's going to very neatly and very perfectly fill in that. So I can just keep going like that and fill in all my colors. I'll usually, set up a second layer where I might have an alternative color. Again, I'm not really minding too much right now which colors they are, because I'll show you how to very quickly mix those up and change those up later. So you can go through very, very quickly. You can just slam in all your base colors. So you don't want to worry about any shading, the way any highlights hit. It's nothing like that at the minute. You just want to get the base color in. It's like if you have a cup that's a green cup, you just want it to be that one nice green color, and you'll worry about the next step in the next step. So so again, I'm going to skip ahead because obviously trying to go through loads and loads of stuff, and I have prepared all of my base flat colors. So I have one there that's all my green, one there that's this pink, another one for these kind of lighter metal colors, and so on and so forth. So I've got 5 layers I'm going to work with. And the key for me being able to work quickly, it all comes down to working in layers and using clipping masks from this. So let's work on the green first. I'm going to create a layer above the base layer, and I'm going to turn that into a clipping mask. So a clipping mask allows me to draw on this layer, and it will stay within the lines of whatever is underneath it. So if I was to take this orange color, the clipping masks, if I undo that clipping mask, you can see that it's really messy. But once I clip it to that, it all fits in very, very nicely. So that's the secret to getting everything looking good. So typically the way I will do this is I'll start with my highlights, and there's loads of ways of approaching this, but this is probably the absolute quickest one. I'm going to stick with the cell brush for the minute. And for highlights, I changed layer mode to a screen. I'm going to drop the opacity down a little bit. So what I'm looking to do here is I'm looking to put in wherever the light's going to hit on the green. And it's as simple as doing a stroke like that, and then perhaps tightening it up a little if I've been a little messy back there. Similarly on the side. So again, the light's kind of coming from this way. So I'm going to have my light appearing on the top and on the side. And obviously it won't be in the front because that's in a little bit of shade from the way that the sun is coming. The backs of the legs probably catch a little bit. Maybe the sides of the knees. Maybe there might be a little bit of reflected light on there. So yeah, so that's a way of very quickly putting in some highlights on stuff. Again, we're just like looking to step by step build it up to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. I'm going to change the background color just so it's a little bit more contrast. So I'll create another layer. This is going to be for my shadows. I'm going to use a clipping mask again so that it all stays neatly in this. I'm going to set the layer mode to multiply on this. So I use multiply for shadows, screen for highlights, drop the opacity down a little bit. I'll work in solid black. Again, it's nice to be able to work in a contrasting color, a complementary color. But if you're looking to do stuff really quick, go with the white for highlights, go with the black for shadows. And it has an extra bonus again, which I'll show you now in a couple of minutes. For this, I'm going to go with a soft edge brush. That's like a texture brush. Let's make sure I'm on the right layer. So now with this, you can kind of build up as you go. And get a kind of a gradient. Probably more obvious up here, where because that's a cylinder, it's going to go from dark to light. You see the chest is going to be in shade, a bit of the arm, front of the legs. I don't want it there. Maybe at the front here as well. So now, because I'm working in layers, I can now, because I've got the values in, I can now go in and play around with my opacity to be able to make the shadows deeper or to make the highlights a little bit less intense. So it's nice to have that flexibility to make decisions as you go and to change your mind. And if you're working on completely flat artwork, you can't do that. The other benefit as well is if you ever decide that you want to come back and change the colors that you're working with. I'm going to work on my green layer. I'll go into my adjustments, hue, saturation, brightness, and my layers. So now I can play around with the hue. So it makes me so happy when I'm starting out to illustrate, because I mean, I used to do stuff and I would hate the colors in the end. And so having the flexibility to be able to make it up as you go, or to change your mind, or to just make a little bit of a tweak, then it makes things so much easier. So yeah, so let's do the same on the other color. So you'll see I'm doing the exact same thing on each one of these flat color layers. I'm going to use a screen blend mode for the highlights. I'm going to use multiply for the shadows. So I'll create a layer, I'll clip it to the base, and
do reach out to Tony as well, as I say, with comments on social, chat to him. He's very open to that. And if you want that version of Photoshop, just flag it up and it will get made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the more interest that we hear in it as well, the more likely it is to get put to the top of the queue to jump into as well. Yeah. So I think we want to let this pack breathe a little bit as well, and just see what feedback is coming in from people, and that'll all get wrapped into any other software versions that we do. And I mean, in theory, if we're going to do it for Photoshop, it should be a simple step to do it for Affinity products as well. Yeah, which I absolutely love the Affinity stuff too. So yeah, so same deal again. I'm just going to put in a multiply layer. If I can find it, it's always at the top. Like that, a clipping mask. You can probably tell that as this is my first time out, I'm struggling to multitask, to think and talk and draw at the same time.
It's really hard. I've only been on your side of it once, actually, with doing some artwork in Photoshop whilst trying to talk it through. And oh my goodness, it is really difficult. So yeah, I know exactly how it is. It's much easier doing it. It's much easier from this side of the screen. But that is looking great, Tony. Looking really cool.
So, I mean, if you could even only just do those couple of things, the amount of coloring that you'd be able to do on any sort of objects. Again, as I said earlier, if you can do it on a sphere, a cylinder, and a cube, you can then go and apply this to much more complicated objects, because that's all this is. It's, you know, that's a cylinder, that's a cube, that's a cylinder, and that's, you know, that's there's not much to it once you kind of get your head around working in the layers. So you can see, like, it's starting to look like, oh my god, there's loads of layers here, but it's not. It's the same thing. It's base, highlights, shadows, and it's just repeated over and over and over again. You know, for some layers, okay, a slightly different way, I'm going to use alpha lock. Alpha lock is where you lock wherever there are pixels, and you can paint away without going outside of what's already there. So you can choose alpha lock, or as the lovely Adrienne from Design Cuts reminded me the other day, you can use a 2-finger swipe, and that will alpha lock. You'll see the background changes to a checkered pattern. So now let's say, I'll just use a random marker, and I'll do this a kind of a more traditional way. I'll select the base color of the blue, and I'll get a darker color, and I'll just start to put some of this in for some shadows. We didn't go a bit darker than that. So yeah, so I'm just kind of using markers. I mean, you can see that, you know, that it doesn't quite go with the style, but it's another style that you could do the entire inking process in. Or again, if you want it to look a little bit more smoother and clean, maybe I'll grab a smudge brush, and now that I've got all the values in there, I can blend that together. So it's, you know, it's a similar result as if I'd used a soft brush to begin with. So it's really down to what way you think it's gonna look the best. One of the other little things I'll do at a certain point as well is I'll actually add white ink to everything. I wasn't going to actually run through it, but I'll do it here. I'm going to go back to my inker, and these are the little things that start to give a little bit of pop to everything. So where you've got your kind of little reflections, you know, it just starts to put a bit of life into the characters, especially in the eyes. So anywhere where there might be a kind of an edge, or the sunlight or light is just going to reflect off it, it just gives it a little extra bit of pop. Especially on the metallic goodness of the robots, where they're, you know, there's going to be shininess everywhere. So yeah, so you can kind of go nuts with that and add it in on all the edges.
I think that they're wonderful things for practicing your lighting on, right? And your lighting effects, and, you know.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think lighting makes such a big difference, even on a very, very simple illustration. It can be the difference between something looking good and great with
Red and gold are very compass, aren't they? They're very scout compass.
Absolutely. I'm not sure how well the colors are coming over on the stream, but
That are good.
But it's red here. Yeah, so maybe something like that.
Nice.
You know, so again, like when you change the color, sometimes you might need to go and tweak the opacity of your multiply layer. Like I might think the shadows are a little bit too much on the gold now. So yeah, but one of the other little tricks that I have is I love to put a bit of noise and a little bit of texture on top of everything at the end. So this is, if anybody knows of a quicker way to do this in Procreate, please shout it out. But this is the way that I do it. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to paint over everything, but only on the silhouette of the character. So it's relatively easy to be able to do stuff like that in Photoshop, but Procreate, maybe not so much. So I'm going to hide everything except for my main dude. I'm going to go into the Actions menu and I'm going to copy a canvas. I'm going to make sure I'm up at the top, and I'm going to paste what I've just copied. Now, this is not going to be seen anywhere. This is purely so that I can get the shape of the pixels. So that's hidden. It's not visible at all. But I am going to create another layer. I'm going to select this fully pasted element, and I'm going to choose Select, which will create a mask around it. I'm going to select the other layer, and I'm going to create a mask. What I have now is I can paint whatever I want inside of this. So it's nice if you want to put on some color dodge at the end, but you don't want to spend ages having to clean up the background. Or if you want to do what I'm about to do, which is put on a noise texture. Let's see. Yes, I'll go for a shader.
I do love a bit of noise. It's something I used to do with my photo manipulation a lot, was exactly this, and then add noise at the end. And it always just really added depth and realism.
Absolutely, it's a functional thing as well, because it compresses the colors and the values, and it just makes them a little bit warmer and just all gel together, just that little bit extra. I'm going to paint on this in a black, and I'm not going to change the layer mode just yet, just so it's really obvious. I'm pretty much going to cover over everything. I might go a little heavier on some of the shadow parts. If I zoom in, you can see the effect that's had. Now, obviously, that's way too strong and it's too harsh, but I'll switch it to something like a soft light, and maybe dial it back just a little bit. So now you can see a kind of a before and after.
It's much richer, isn't it, after?
Yeah, and I think it can be. I think one of the traps that you can fall in, and I certainly do all the time especially when I'm at the coloring or the shading stage, is you can try to overcomplicate things, and you start to put in more colors or more blends or things like that. And sometimes all it needs is just a little something to just give it a little bit of texture. And I mean, I think it was when I first started using Affinity Designer. One of the cool features they have in that is that there's a noise slider for any of the fill colors that you're using for the vector shapes. And I was like, where's this been my whole life? I mean, I just wish that when I'm sending stuff out to clients, it's all vector based, that I'd have this noise in it and I'd be able to do it so easily. It was always done with a complicated layer mask afterwards, or a clip of mask, and it was just a nightmare. So so that's the same principle.
Nice. Dana and Paul both say if you swipe down with 3 fingers and selecting copy all will do the same thing. Oh,
yep. No, that's my absolute favorite shortcut that I have on it. For some reason, it's appearing down the bottom corner. But anyway, so that's, you can do the same thing again. And I'm going to select the outer shape. And maybe for this, I'll use the noise magic again. I'll do it in a white. And let's really kind of blast out some of the lighter areas. Again, I'll just go back and play around with the level of detail on that. So yeah, so I mean, obviously you could spend a lot more time and do it in a lot more detail, and a little bit cleaner than I've done it with every one of the stages. But I think you should get the idea with that. And my final step is I'll usually whack in a texture file on top of everything at the end. So I'm going to insert a file. There's a bunch of these. It comes with the brush pack as well, that we've kind of color graded them and corrected them so that you can use them in just pretty much a couple of clicks. So I've just inserted a file on top of everything. I'm going to change that to a multiply mode and maybe just drop the opacity down a little bit, so it has a bit of that grungy, cardboardy
nice. I do love it in the red and the gold. I think it looks great.
Yep, good call, Design Cuts community. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. I mean, at this stage, it's a case of just by degrees. It's like it's deciding when you want to stop working on it rather than actually finishing it. So you can add in maybe put a wash in the background to give it a bit more depth. You can, put in some more highlights. I mean, I'd probably go and I might drop a pattern or put some more details in on the top and get my N and S in for north and south. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So you can see it's the same process, just repeated over and over again until you're sick of it. So
it looks awesome, Tony. It looks absolutely awesome. And that's it. We're out of time, but that was an absolutely awesome session. Thanks so much, Tony. I hope that was okay. And for your first session, I know it's not an easy thing to do. So I think you did really well. I hope everybody give Tony some love in the chat.
No, thanks Brilliant. Very much, Matt, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully there was something of use there, and hopefully we'll be chatting to you soon.